A motorcycle, after all, is a modern horse. You are in charge of it, balancing it properly, taking the right line on corners, riding quickly. Gives you a charge like very few other things can.
The legend, the late, great Murray Walker there. Welcome along to part one of our World Superbike season preview. Welcome along also to the Motorbike Racing Show. It's Thursday the 15th of February 2024. I'm Greg Haines and we're going to be bookending the weekend with parts 1 and 2 of our World Superbike season preview with double world champion and my co-commentator at Eurosport, James Toseland. But before we get into the WorldSBK season preview, here's the latest news from around the world in motorcycle racing. Casey Stoner, two-time MotoGP world champion, has been quoted by Gazzetta in Italy as saying that he left Honda at the end of 2012 because they were tending to listen more to Marc Marquez than himself. Stoner saying, "We'd reached a point in time at which Marc's crew was moving away from my suggestions. That's the main reason I left Honda. I did warn them that if they kept doing that, there'd be only one rider capable of making the bike work and that we'd have a lot of crashes. I was proven right in 2015. Aprilia has singled out Enea Bastianini of Ducati as a rider on their radar. Massimo Rivola, the CEO of Aprilia, telling GP1 in Italy, "Everyone knows I'm a fan of Enea's. An Italian rider would be useful to us, but at the moment, it's just too early to say." Over at KTM, they're going to keep their carbon fibre chassis from 2023 for this year, with more information expected to come in Qatar at the test next week regarding engine and aero specs. Lots of liveries have been revealed over recent days, not least at Repsol Honda, which, well, quite frankly, features a lot less of Repsol. The Spanish giant has been the title sponsor of that team since 1995. "This is probably the most important year of my career so far," says 2020 world champion Joan Mir, who of course won that title with Suzuki, but so far has failed to finish on the podium after 2 seasons with Honda. VR46 has revealed contact from other manufacturers. "It's true that our contract ends this season. We have the option of 2 more years with Ducati, but other manufacturers have also been in touch with us," says VR46 team boss Pablo Nieto when talking with MotoGP.com. Xavi Flores has signed up with Attack Performance Progressive Yamaha for this year's Daytona 200, which is taking place in early March. The Spanish rider from just outside Valencia has 6 World Superbike podiums to his name between 2016 and 2018, and last year dominated the Moto America Supersport title race in his debut season, riding a Ducati Panigale V2 for the Warhorse team. Plenty of construction work is taking place at Spain's Navarra circuit ahead of hosting round 1 of British Superbikes in the middle of April. This is the first phase of making the track smoother and safer, which also includes the introduction of new modern marshal posts, while in the future significant modifications will be made to the layout of the circuit itself. More information on that in this week's Motorcycle News, a report there from Josh Close. And down in New Zealand, Cormac Buchanan has successfully defended his Supersport 600 title. The 17-year-old wrapped it up last weekend at his home circuit, Teretonga Park, and making it extra special, the event in Invercargill was part of the prestigious Burt Munro Challenge. So Cormac, congratulations, a superb achievement. What a great start to the year for you. And of course, you're going to be going on to race in the Junior GP Series, the Moto3 World Championship as well. So congratulations. Hi, Cormac.
Hey Greg, yeah, no, of course it's super cool to win the championship, and especially at home as well. Of course, Teretonga is my home track, so to do it in front of all my family and as well as at the Burton Road Challenge was also quite a cool aspect of it. So yeah, no, it was a super cool feeling, and yeah, it's quite good because we get to go into the last round now, just not really having any pressure on myself. With the title wrapped up around early, it certainly makes it, you know, just have a bit of fun at the last round. Of course, being a racer, I want to win there as well. But, yeah, it'll be just a bit of a last hit out in New Zealand before we head back over to Europe. So, yeah, it's a super cool feeling. And to get the 6th one in just, I think, three years or so, 6 titles in 3 years is certainly pretty cool, and only 17. So, yeah, hopefully to add a few more in the future.
Yeah, it's fantastic stuff. And it must be nice as well to win so early in the calendar year as well, of course. We're not even into March yet, are we? But what is the plan, Cormac, for this season? I remember you racing in the British Talent Cup and commentating on you there. But what's the plan? And by the way, are you racing in Australia in Phillip Island next weekend?
No, I won't be racing World Superbike at Phillip Island because I think we're racing Hampton Downs in Auckland that same weekend. And then the week after I'll be heading to Spain. So, yeah, so this year really it's just Junior GP, no Rubbery Cup because I finished my third year last year. So I think that'll probably be quite good just focusing on the single championship, focusing just on one bike and one, I guess, type of training because, it's quite different, the two. It's kind of like almost two disciplines really, Rookies Cup and Junior GP. So, I'm looking forward to just the one championship. It'll be a long year, but, I think it'll be really good just doing the single Junior GP championship and, just seeing what we can achieve this year. And then hopefully the goal is to move into World Championship Moto3 next year. But, it all just rides on how this year goes. But, really looking forward to it.
Cormac, congratulations. Good luck with everything this year and with the rest of the season. That's Cormac Buchanan there, having just wrapped up the 600 Supersport title down in New Zealand. Okay, then sit back, relax. Part 2 of our World Superbike season preview will be coming up on Monday next week. But for now, here's part 1, myself and 2-time World Superbike champion James Toseland. Well, James, it's that time of year again. It always feels, doesn't it, in the middle of February, like you've got time, get your notes ready, you've still got 3 weeks, you've still got 2 weeks, and all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, the season's about to start, but I can't wait. This is going to be a brilliant year, isn't it?
It is, Greg. To be honest, in front of me, I've got that many pieces of paper. I look like I'm studying for my GCSEs again with all these new rules and stuff, but it is exciting, mate. There's a lot going on, a lot to digest before we try and splurge it all out live on air. But I'm sure we'll get us ducks in a row, mate.
Yeah, and I think with our output this year, there's so many things we can bring to everyone, isn't there? Get more behind the scenes, get into some of the technical stuff, the stories of the up-and-coming riders, but also, I guess from the beginning, explaining all these new rules because so much is different this year.
It is, but it's they're kind of like 4 or 5 bullet points, but they're quite dramatic changes as well, which are going to give really different outcomes to different teams, to different manufacturers, to different riders, and it's going to give a real flavour of interest to the championship, because I'm hoping the racing will be closer for it, and if the racing's closer for it, the way that we can explain why it's closer because of these new rules is going to just add to the show, I'm sure.
Yeah, because I think if you look at Aragon last year, the race we had there, and then an even better race at Portimao, and then an even better race again, one of the best races ever at Portimao, and even better at Jerez. The racing was by no means boring. It was spectacular, but I guess you could say it was a little bit predictable, knowing Bautista was probably going to come strong in the final third. This year, you get the impression his life might be a little bit more difficult.
Yeah. The racing was fantastic because Toprak literally held his breath like he does on the braking to catch Bautista up at the end of the straights. But the one thing that Gregorio Olivier, Dorna, the FIM, what they're trying to do is just eliminate the predictability of that Ducati blasting past out of the last corner. And no matter what Toprak or Jonathan Rea or anybody else in World Superbike tries to do, it was impossible to keep the Ducati behind, and the win was inevitable for Bautista, and that's what they are trying to eliminate with these new rules.
Okay, so where should we start? Because we don't have to go in any particular order. Let's just have a chat as though we were sitting in the bar, because I think that's the great thing about a podcast, isn't it? We can be nice and relaxed, no particular structure. The rule changes then. We've got fuel going down from 24 to 21 litres. The weight limits. Should we start with the weights? Because this is something we've been talking about now for years and years and years. It's finally happened. Some people are saying they needed to give Bautista even more weight. Other people were saying that would be dangerous. It needs to be a little bit fair. So what's your view on it, James? Just explain to us, how does it work? And do you think they've found a good balance with this?
I really do. It is difficult because when you've got riders like Bautista in a championship against Loris Bars, he's gone to America now, but Scott Redding, there could be like a 20 kilogram difference between a Scott Redding and a Bautista. but you can't strap 20 kilograms on. You can't chuck a suitcase on Bautista's back to even up the competitiveness, because it doesn't work that way. So it's really difficult to know how much weight to add to a light rider to just balance out the disadvantages of the power to weight ratios in motorcycle racing. And I think the 80 kilogram is a good starting point. 80 kilograms is the rider with all of his gear on, boots, leathers, back protector, chest protector, gloves, helmet, you name it, everything on. If he's under 80 kilograms with all of that stuff on, then you've got to put half a kilo on the bike for every kilo you are under that. So, for example, Bautista's 67 kilograms under the 80 kilograms, the minimum. So he has to put 6.5 kilograms onto the bike. It's not onto him, but it's onto the bike. Obviously, you can put a bit of weight on through the winter time, and if you can increase that and be a little bit less than the 67 towards the 80, then he won't have to put as much on the bike. And I think that is a good starting point to get in a balance.
Could this, ironically, James, even be an advantage for Ducati in the sense that knowing he's going to need a little bit more weight, yes, he can beef himself up a bit in terms of muscle mass and all the rest of it, but could they maybe, strengthen a bit of bracketry on the bike or this and that to make the bike a little bit stronger, knowing then he's got to put less ballast on board?
Well, one of the things you mentioned, which I've just been writing the notes down here, and I didn't actually think about it until actually jotting everything down, is the fuel. The fuel's going from 24 litres to 21 litres.
True.
Well, 1 litre of fuel at ambient 20 degrees, say, is 0.72 of a kilogram. So 3/4 of a kilogram, basically.
Right.
So you can do the math there. 3 kilograms less is about, 2.5 kilograms less on the bike compared to it was last year with 24 litres of fuel. So, Bautista's already saved a couple of kilograms at least on a motorcycle he's got to wrestle around with the heavier bike, because it's naturally become lighter. Obviously, that's a moving target because the fuel obviously goes down during the race. But at the beginning of the race, at full fuel load, the bike is going to be about 2.5 kilograms lighter than it was last year. Obviously, the 6.5 on, you can do an average there. So it's because at 24 litres, all of a sudden, that's going to be like 8 or 9 kilograms more on a motorcycle at full fuel. But at full fuel now with 21, it's a little bit lighter motorcycle as well, which will help a bit.
Yeah, and give or take a few kilos. I might not have got the maths exactly right either, but I think they lose about 16 kilos in fuel alone, don't they, across the course of a race? Bearing in mind, obviously, you're starting with a lot less you're going to finish with. So, yeah, maybe it's not going to be as bad as we think. And Ducati, whether you like it or not, they are very, very intelligent, aren't they? And I think Gigi Dall'Igna in particular knows what he wants when he goes into these technical meetings with Dorna, the FIM, and the other manufacturers, the MSMA, as they call it. And they've basically said, okay, we'll do the weight limit thing, but we want our revs back. So Ducati have got 500 revs back again. The revs they lost last year, 250 times 2, they've got 500 revs back. So yes, Bautista's got some weight. And remember, most of the other Ducati riders won't need any added weight at all, but they've got an extra 500 revs. So that's hardly going to do them any harm.
Yeah, but that is the homologated rev limit that they actually, homologated the V4 Ducati with the Panigale, and that's 16,100, I believe, compared to Kawasaki's 15,100. So there's 1,000 revs there difference just with the homologation. But I think that's a fair compromise. It's like, put everything back to what things are homologated for the World Superbike Championship for, with these differences, and then let's see. I mean, the one thing that they are not changing is the RPM if there is an advantage with the Ducati this year. The only way that the RPM is going to change, I believe, is if you've got some super concessions. And if there's, like, say for Honda, if they get some concessions, they change something on the bike, like an engine modification or chassis modification, who knows that modification might allow them to be 1 second faster every lap. It's unlikely, but you don't know, do you, Greg? So, but if one of these super concessions parts allows the manufacturer to improve their lap times by that amount, then they'll come back on the revs of that motorcycle, rather than going like deleting that concession part and going back to square one and them not being competitive again. They'll allow them to keep the concession part, but then doctor the revs if need be. That's the only way that they are going to alter the revs.
Yeah, and from what I've heard as well, James, I think they can give people revs if they're struggling. So we've seen that in the past, haven't we? They can go up in 250 or 500 increments.
Yeah.
So that seems fair, doesn't it? If you maybe help somebody who's struggling, but don't penalise somebody for their success. And that's something Kawasaki used to get very aggrieved about as well back in the day when they brought in reverse grids and various other things to try and slow them down. It doesn't seem correct, really, to punish a manufacturer for all their investment and hard work. Yes, by all means, help the others, but don't punish us for all our success.
Yeah, I think that's what they're trying to do here. They are trying to just get a platform of motorcycle racing where everybody can come and compete and be successful. Because you've got differences of objectives as well with manufacturers, Greg. You've got, Honda arguably building a motorcycle predominantly for the road, which, has to have some kind of reliability, comfort to the kind of experience of riding on a road. Whereas Ducati, you could say that they predominantly build a bike for the track. And with those differences, you've got to even up how easy it is for a manufacturer building for the road, how much they have to do to a bike to convert it to the track compared to Ducati as well. So I think, and also there's a safety thing with the fuel going to 21 litres. These bikes are going faster and faster and faster. Look at MotoGP now. They're 226 miles an hour down the straight. Superbikes is like 212 miles an hour. And the circuits are running out of room for if riders crash mid-corner at speed. So also the 21 litre is restricting that horsepower to make sure that these bikes don't outgrow our circuits. Because if a motorcycle power outgrows the circuit, what do you have to do? You have to move the barriers back. If you move the barriers back, you move the grandstands back. And the further away you go away from a circuit, the worse it is to watch at. If you go and watch a race at Cadwell Park, or you go and watch a race at Silverstone, it's a completely different experience. And I think this is a good idea also to make sure that we can race on the circuits that we do with the crowd as close as possible.
Yeah, I completely agree. As a lifelong motor racing fan of bikes and cars, James, I completely agree. Because also, we'll start losing all of the great circuits, won't we, if we're not careful? Because they'll say, they're too dangerous, can't go there anymore, can't go there anymore. And that's why we've lost a lot of great tracks over the years, because they were deemed too dangerous. But I think, yeah, we know it's inherently dangerous, don't we? We know there's always the danger of a rider being struck by their own bike if they crash or somebody else's bike. But we don't really want situations where a rider can be pinned between his bike and a barrier like Pol Espargaro was at Portimao in MotoGP last year. That's the sort of thing they're trying to avoid here, isn't it? Just avoid people getting to the real end of the gravel. We don't need that, do we? And who's going to notice watching on the TV or trackside if they're a second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds a lap slower? It's not going to take anything away from the spectacle, is it? Surely.
No, not at all. And, that's the reason why MotoGP went from the 990 engine back in the day to 800s, because of the Dejiro Kato fatality, unfortunately, at Suzuka. They thought the bikes were going too fast down the straight, so they went to 800cc. But then what they didn't really take into consideration was how much faster the bikes were going to go around mid-corner, because the less inertia, less weight of the 800cc engine compared to the 1000cc. And with more speed in the middle of the corner meant the more riders were hitting the barriers on an 800 compared to 1000. So that's why they came back to 1000cc to have that weight and inertia, which slowed you down mid-corner as well. So there's a lot. We are at the limit of these the machines of how fast we can go around these tracks with the runoff that we have. And I think it's a really good thing that Gregor Lavia and the FAM are doing here, is just making sure we stay within that. We all love development. We all want to go faster. We all want to break lap times and lap records. But we are at the limit now for what we can do around these tracks.
Yeah, and like you say, safety's got to be number one here, hasn't it? Because, yes, this is a show, this is entertainment, it's a technology race and all the rest of it. But at the end of the day, there's human lives at play here. And you just can't play around with that, can you? You can't risk it, whether it's the lives of the riders, corner workers, marshals, spectators. In years gone by, we saw some horrendous accidents, didn't we? Street circuits in particular, with spectators being taken out as well. And no, I agree. I think it's great, isn't it? And isn't it nice, James, that all of the manufacturers, the FIM, the governing body, and Dorna, the commercial rights holder with Greg Lavia there in the Superbike scenario, they have all got together and they have come to what seems like a reasonable compromise. That's really good.
It is. And like I say, all these rules, I think they tick a lot of boxes, including the sustainable fuel that we've got coming in for this year. The E40 fuel, which is 40% sustainable, and that's the rules for 2024. I think that's great as well because environmentally we're not that friendly when it comes to motorsport racing. And I think, Formula One next year, they're going to go to 100% sustainable fuels. So that's going to be interesting to see that transition there. And I'm sure that motorcycle racing won't be too far beyond that because, burning fuel, burning tires, all of the trucks that are going around the world and the aeroplanes to carry the freight, we are pretty heavy on a carbon footprint as well. So this year to notice as well that we've got to run 40% sustainable fuels is a good thing as well for superbikes.
Now, in terms of those concessions we mentioned before, it used to be able to change, didn't it, James, after rounds 3, 6 and 9, every 3 rounds. They've changed that this year to every 2 rounds. So we could potentially get changes after rounds 2, 4, 6, 8 and 10 in what is a 12-round series. That'll be interesting to keep an eye on. There's another rule change as well with the percentages of the engine parts you can change, aren't you? You can add weight or take weight away now by up to 20% when it comes to crankshafts, balance shafts, things like that. It seems, James, and correct me if I'm wrong, that it's people like Kawasaki and BMW who could profit more than this. Maybe Yamaha as well because of their balancing shaft there on the cross-plane crank. So that should be an interesting development too.
It is. The crankshaft obviously is the shaft that kind of houses the conrods and the pistons that go up and down, which then create the rotation movement to get the power to the gearbox and then to the chain to the rear wheel. And the balancing shaft is really for the cross-plane crankshaft like the Yamaha because it hasn't got the conventional 1 and 4 piston going up while the 2 and 3 piston are at the bottom to get the primary balance of the engine because it fires in a different order with 90 degrees. And that, not to go too technical, but the cross-plane crankshaft, it fires at 90, 180, 270, 180 compared to the conventional crank where it's every 90 degrees. It fires at 90 degrees of the tire rotation. And where the technology is going is to have an unconventional firing order or a longer distance from 90 to 270 of the rotation. It gives the tire time to recover and to find the grip at low speeds with these Pirelli tires or whatever tire, even in MotoGP, obviously. And they're finding out that firing the cylinders every 90 degrees on a conventional firing order is too much horsepower going to the back tire in too frequent of a space. And that's what the cross-plane kind of does. It fires at different intervals as the rotation of the tire to give a bit of a break. And it's fascinating. And obviously, 3% to 20%, you're looking at kind of maybe the weight of the crankshaft and the weight of the balancing shaft because of the internal tuning of the bikes that we can do in World Superbikes. It's probably lighter because, lighter materials inside the engine. It's not as much energy to turn the engine around, which then creates more horsepower kind of thing as well. But that's a little bit more on the technical side, Greg.
No, it is fascinating. Well, I'm not technical like you, obviously, but it is so interesting. And the way the power is delivered to the ground and all the rest of it through the tyre. James, do you think now it's going to be an advantage if you can carry more corner speed to not have to get so hard on the power coming out of the corner, bearing in mind they do have less fuel to play with because fuel equals power, doesn't it? So I don't know whether that's right or wrong. Is that going to make a difference? And also, is this going to be as extreme, do you think? It's certainly early in the season before people have got their head around it with electronics and all the rest of it. Might we even see people running out of fuel in the closing stages? Or is it not going to be that bad?
Oh, good question. Obviously, it's always a possibility when a rule change like this alters the fuel capacity. Unless you've got electronics and the ECU controls the fuel and knows how much fuel it can put into an engine with the length of the race. I know MotoGP has that. It kind of calculates the first 5 laps to see how much a rider's kind of using, and then it knows how much horsepower that it is going to be or how much fuel it's going to need for the end of the race. So yeah, there is a possibility of that, Greg, for sure. We've heard talking about the split throttle bodies up on the Honda, the new Fireblade engine, and basically at low speeds, when you open the throttle, obviously they're not cabled anymore. It's all electronically controlled. At low speeds, when the rider opens the throttle, it only opens 2 throttle bodies out of the 4 cylinders. It only opens 2, so you've only got half the horsepower going through that rear tire to, again, try and help it, because there's too much horsepower compared to grip now with Superbikes and MotoGP. So these engine configurations and the firing order that they're getting, they're trying to find as much grip as they possibly can. So, yeah, the technology as well coming in, especially with Honda, with that's the change that they're bringing for the season.
Yeah, in terms of Honda as well, while we're talking about them, they've got a new team principal, haven't they, James, with Jose Escamas, who's a Spaniard, come across from HRC's MotoGP project. There's a nice lady called Maria Popper as well, who I met at the Jerez test a few weeks ago as the new team coordinator. Of course, we had Leon Camia there before, didn't we? And Cami, who was working with him, he's had several coordinators actually the last few years. Pete Jennings is no longer a crew chief. Tom Jojic has come in, and we were having a look at his CV, weren't we, the other day, and having a bit of a chat on WhatsApp. I mean, he's worked all over the place. He's worked for TWR, he's worked for BAR in Formula One, the Roberts GP team. So Tom Jojic working with Iker Lecuona might just be the breath of fresh air Iker needs, but you still get the feeling, and I hate to say this again, that Honda are really lost and quite some way off. I hope that is not the case.
Well, when Iker Lecuona and Xavi Vierge, they both had a go on the new bike with the split throttle bodies. They had really positive feedback initially at the Jerez test, like a couple of days after the final race. But it hasn't kind of moved on from that point to find the half a second a lap that they're looking for compared to their closest competitors. And it seems like their heads are down. I've seen a couple of post-test interviews from Iker and Xavi, and they seem really down about the prospects of this season already. Even on the grid last year, I was doing the grid walks, and Xavi and Iker were quite critical of the Fireblade, and that you could just tell that the excitement of riding that motorcycle wasn't there, and it doesn't seem like it's coming that quickly through the wintertime as well. Phillip Island, it's a unique circuit. You know, if you've got a bit of bravery and you get a decent setup, you can hold your breath and have a good result there because it's fast and flowing. At the tight and twisty tracks, we will see if Honda's improved or not, but it's not looking good.
Yeah, let's just hope they can get there. One thing they do have to their advantage is a concession in the way of test days. As most of you will know, if you watch with us on Eurosport and Discovery Plus across the season, you'll know that we have 10 days of testing per race rider during the end of one season and the end of the next. So basically, from the end of 2023 season in Jerez and the end of this year in Jerez, each race rider has 10 days, with the exception of the BMW and Honda race riders who have 16 days of testing, unless the brand wins 2 races, and then they get dropped back down again to 10. James, we'll talk more in next week's podcast, just before we're about to go on air effectively next weekend, about the individual riders, the teams, what can Jonathan do with the Yamaha, what can Toprak do with the BMW. But let's just talk quickly about testing, because BMW have a brand new test team now, don't they? With Sylvain Guintoli, the 2014 world champion, Bradley Smith. I'm sure there'll be some input as well from Marcus Reiterberger and Ilya Mikhalchik. And they are really taking things seriously. I mean, they had 6 bikes, all 4 race riders from Bonovo and SMR, and the test riders at the Jerez test I went to back in January. Then they went on to Portimao as well. Surely now, as BMW have said themselves, there are no excuses in 2024.
No, absolutely not. And it's essential to have a test team when the package is so far behind the main competitors. Because what happens is the factory team, they bring the new parts and the factory riders have to test them, develop them in a race weekend. And obviously, inevitably, some aren't going to work that well. But not just that. If you change a bike underneath a rider so great that is not really sure of where the limit is anymore on that package, it's impossible for the riders to get the best out of any package that they bring because they don't understand it. And this is the real importance of a test team. They can test all of the parts, see what works and what doesn't work, and really get confirmation of what does and doesn't work before it goes to the riders, because the chances are it is going to improve the bike for the factory boys at the weekend, which then immediately improves the confidence of the rider on the bike, and you can get much more consistency with the results. And also with the concession points as well, Greg, you were talking about. For the first time this year, you're going to get half points in the sprint race as well. So it's not just the 3-2-1 in the race 1, race 2. You're going to get half points, which obviously 1.5, 1 and 0.5 for third in that sprint race as well. So I think the minimum is 33 points. If you fall 33 points behind the top boys, that's when your concession parts can kind of come into play.
Now, that really is interesting about the sprint race. I didn't know that, James. That's really interesting because I think that's completely correct as well, because if the sprint race contributes to championship points, which of course it does, why shouldn't it contribute to the concession point system as well? And we do often see, don't we, certain bikes and riders are stronger in the long races, some are stronger in the sprint races. So yeah, that makes perfect sense, doesn't it?
Yeah. And obviously, 33 points. It's not going to take too long to accumulate those kind of points. Obviously, 3 races per weekend. If one rider does like a treble, obviously, with how about consistent Bautista was last year, and you're finishing 5th and 6th, you can soon get to those 13 points within where they've done it for 2 rounds instead of 3. I think you can fall 33 points behind kind of within 2 rounds. And then for the 3rd round, you could possibly have the concession development already in play compared to one later race than that, if you know what I mean. So it allows the teams to catch up a bit quicker because it's not easy to bolt things on and develop things and to bring concession parts on. It looks like it's just a bit of a Christmas list and you can just pick one out and instantly you go 0.1 quicker, but it doesn't necessarily work that way.
Yeah, and we saw this, didn't we, last year with people like Kawasaki? They got extra revs, but they couldn't really use them until much later on in the season because all the gear ratios are locked in for the whole year. It's not just as simple as, oh, great, we'll turn the engine up. There's all these other factors, aren't there, to take into account?
It is. I mean, increased revs, you increase the complexities of how an engine works and how kind of economical it is on getting the fuel and air in and getting the exhaust gases out and getting that compression and the engine turning around in the best way possible. And the engines are designed electronically, a lot of it as well. But, just increasing revs, it might sound an easy horsepower increase, but it's not. It's more complicated than that.
Now, while we record this today, James, we have had a development, haven't we? Because we were expecting the Phillip Island test to take place as usual next Monday and Tuesday with about 4 hours of track time for World Superbike and World Supersport on each of the days. But it's just been confirmed a few minutes ago before we started recording this. And by the time this podcast goes out, I hope I would have got some extra information to find out exactly why this is. But all we can say at the moment is that Supersport are testing only on Monday. Superbike will only have Tuesday now. Apparently, it's due to some of the maritime shipping disruptions we've had in recent months, and we've heard a lot about this on the news, of course, and getting some tyres over. Now, I'm only speculating, James. I don't know whether Pirelli's rushed over some harder tyres, bearing in mind we've got this new track surface and they're trying to avoid problems with tyres. We've had a lot of exploding tyres at Phillip Island in the past in various different motor racing categories, notably Superbikes and MotoGP, compulsory pit stops and all the rest of it. Whatever the reason is, though, there's only 1 day of testing now, and that's going to change the team's workload massively, isn't it? They're not going to have overnight, Monday to Tuesday, to go through the day to decide what they're going to do. They've only got 1 day now.
It is, Greg. But one of the issues for World Superbike starting in Phillip Island and so early in the season is, you've had 3 tests for already, 1 after the season finished before Christmas and then 2 afterwards in Jerez and Portimao. But you've only had those kind of 5 or 6 days, and then all of the riders and all the teams have got to make a decision on what's best out of the new parts of what to pack in those crates to go to Australia. So, there shouldn't be that much to kind of test and develop because you've kind of narrowed it down anyway already in these previous tests. But it's still, it's like a lack of time on the track, which is lack of data. So it's going to be a much more intense process before the race, that's for sure.
It's always a nice bonus, isn't it, James, for everybody to have a little test there at Phillip Island, which we often see rookies doing well, don't we? And then they struggle more because they haven't had a test at later rounds before the race. But is it fair to say this is going to play into the hands of somebody like Alvaro Bautista, who's there with the same team, same technicians, data from before, all the others, Toprak on the Beamer, Jonathan on the Yamaha, they've not got any track data on their new bikes, have they? So you have to feel those staying with the same team from last year will be a little bit benefited from this.
Yeah, absolutely. But Phillip Island, because it's such a fast-flowing circuit, any of those world-class riders can jump on any bike and get a pretty similar result even after a couple of days. It's one of those tracks. It's not overly technical, Phillip Island, but you do need to know where and how to go fast around it because it is so fast. It's one of the highest average speeds of any circuit. And if it has been resurfaced, it'll be even faster. And if it's been resurfaced, you've got to say that the grip's going to be higher. If the grip is higher, maybe it won't wear the tyres out as much because there's not as much wheel spin, or it could wear the tyres out more because of the force it's actually putting through the tyre. So this is really unknown for Pirelli. But I would argue that he wasn't going to wear the tyres out as much if they get the electronics right. And will that play into the hands of BMW? We know how much it's eaten the tyres up over the years, especially at Phillip Island. Phillip Island, I think, is one of the worst tracks for BMW. So for Toprak's prospects, this resurfacing of Phillip Island to start his championship could be pivotal.
Yeah, and we've obviously only just started hearing about this resurfacing work in the last week or two, but you have to think Pirelli would have had a heads up and probably knew this was coming. I mean, they usually send all the PI tyres out the November before, don't they? It's going to be fascinating, though, to see what happens. I chatted with somebody at the circuit, James, earlier on, and they reckon they're hoping that the lap times might be up to 2 seconds quicker. I don't know whether that's going to actually happen, but we'll soon find out. Talking of circuits, quickly, before we sign off from this one, and we'll carry on with our season preview next week in part 2. But we do have some new tracks, don't we, this year? We've got the Blatten Park circuit in Hungary. And by the way, that is going to be so hot when we get there. We're going to have a few really hot rounds this year. Most in the Czech Republic, Hungary. Portimao is going to be boiling, although that's one of the reasons I've actually put sunset races on there. So I think a few reasons. The TV clash with the Olympic Games, the heat, the fact it's holiday season and everybody's going to be on the beach at Portimao, put the races on a bit later, and they're going to be starting the main races at 7 p.m. local time. So that's why they're calling them sunset races. But yeah, the weather has such a bearing, doesn't it? Because most of our rounds are in the European summer. So that's going to be interesting. What do you make of sunset races, though, at Portimao? That's an exciting new venture.
Oh, it'd be lovely. Go for a bit of a sunbathe in the morning before we go into commentary break. That'd be absolutely fabulous. I mean, the only risk is if there is an accident and it is red flagged and things get delayed, there is no proper floodlighting at Portimao, I don't believe, like Qatar. So I don't think we're going to be able to race after a certain time. So it's going to be very dependent on people not having a serious accident, or if the time delays do cause some trouble for that schedule to work.
Yeah, apparently sunset, I've checked this, sunset is officially about 2015 or 2020, that sort of time in the evening. We'll still have light after that, obviously. I think probably till about 9:30, 10 o'clock at night it will still be light, but it's going to be fading light. So yeah, might we get a situation a bit like at the cricket where they have to delay things until the next day? That's going to be fascinating to see what happens there. Cremona in Italy is the other new venue as well. Quite a lot of work's been done there to improve the end of the track. The lap was quite tight before, so I think they're opening up a few of the corners. No grandstands the last time I heard and looked at it, so they've got to put a few stands in as well. I do like, though, James, I've got to say, the fact that we do have some different circuits, and I think, World Superbikes, especially now under the ownership of the same company as it has been for the last 11 years, Dorna, it needs to be different to MotoGP, doesn't it? We need some different circuits and make it look different.
Yeah, it looked different, and also new opportunities for rookies. We've got 4 rookies, this year. Sam Lowes, Taron McKenzie's in there, the 2 Brits. Got Adam Norridin in there as well, obviously Taron's Supersport teammate in there, and Andrea Iannone. I would imagine the Iannone's probably ridden there as an Italian. But it does level the playing field of experience because, you ride against Jonathan Ray and Toprak and Bautista that have had decades of experience riding around these circuits. It's so difficult to compete as a newcomer. So at least with these new tracks, you don't get that, and you can get it like Bradley Ray at Imola. They didn't race at Imola for a few years, did they? And he had that top 6 finish there because it was a bit more of an equal playing field. It can bring up some new results for people.
Yeah, funny enough, just before we started talking, I was listening to the Off Track podcast with Dave Neal, talking with your good mate, Frankie Carchedi. He was saying exactly the same thing. Obviously, he's been looking after Jake Dixon in the Grand Prix paddock. A lot of Jake's best results when he started doing really well in Moto2 did come on the international circuits like Texas, Circuit of the Americas and other places like that, where the European riders didn't have as much experience. The Spaniards, the Italians, they know a lot of these places like the back of their hands. So I agree, it's going to be great to get this sort of level playing field. James, we'll come back to all the riders and teams next week, but just before we sign off from this one, how are you? Because since we last spoke properly on the podcast, you have had your operation in Austin in December. So just tell us, how many operations have you had now on that right wrist since 2011? What did they do this time? And more importantly, how are you?
Yeah, thank you very much, Greg. I'm good. This is the 8th operation on the wrist. It's 8 operations in 12 years. It has been a difficult process on trying to get this wrist to settle in a good place. And this American surgeon out there, Alton Barron, he He does a procedure out there that they don't do here in Europe, and he puts a special man-made cartridge inside, and he unfused the fused wrist that I had, which was quite complicated because all the bones had set together, which then there was zero movement in my wrist. And he's basically cut that in half to create the joint and put this cartridge in between. And so far, so good. I'm 2.5 months post-op now. I've got about 40-50% movement back, which is amazing. It's a little bit uncomfortable whilst doing so. So I'm hoping that everything will just settle in time in the next couple of months. And if everything can settle and the pain can die down, it's wonderful to have some movement back from a piano playing, just for general stuff, driving, everything day to day. It's amazing. So fingers crossed it'll settle, mate.
Honestly, that is really... I know we have a lot of jokes about your party trick when you used to be able to shake the wrist and you could hear that sort of metallic sound it made. But no, that is really good news, James. But are you going to have to come up with a new party trick now that's gone? What are you going to do?
Well, I'm hoping to play the piano a bit better, so that I might be able to perform again. So I'll have to bring the piano back into play with my little party.
That'd be good. Great stuff. Okay, well, thanks for that, James. Are you happy to?
I'll just one more thing, Greg. Sorry,
that
we haven't mentioned is the Women's World Championship.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've got next week as well.
Give that a mention.
Yeah, go ahead, because next week we'll go more into the Superbike teams and riders. So yeah, Supersport 300. I'm just going to throw in one thing about that, James. They've only got 25 minutes of practice, I think it is now, on a Friday morning before Superpole. So that's going to be dramatic. But yeah, go ahead, Women's World Championship.
Yeah, 20 with the 300s, 25-minute practice, and then a 15-minute qualifying. But
yeah,
you could say that was that was better for people's health. the less time on track for them lads and ladies. Maybe it might be a bit safer to take half an hour off their schedule. But it is going to be fast and furious. That is for sure on the schedule for them. And obviously introducing the women's championship as well. It's a one-mate championship on the motorcycle front with an R7. That looks a really cool bike. It's a twin-cylinder Yamaha. It's obviously quite a bit more horsepower than the R3, which is kind of what's in the 300 category that you just mentioned there. The R3 is about 41 brake horsepower kind of thing, and the R7 is about 73. So it's got a nice bit more horsepower. It'll be a bit heavier, obviously, than the R3 as well. So it's going to be a really interesting championship. We saw Ana Carrasco's just signed up, one of the female superstars, and that's a really good thing for the credit of the championship. And I really hope it's as successful as I'm hoping it to be. But because I think we've realised over a certain horsepower, it's difficult for women to compete against men in this wonderful sport that we have. And with it being so difficult, they find it difficult to fund themselves, because unless you are super competitive these days in the top 6 of any world championship, very difficult to get your sponsors and the backing to even go racing. And it's not a cheap sport. So like in football or rugby or anything else that we've got, there is separate championships for women against women to showcase themselves as a separate show. And if you can be competitive in that line, it's going to be easier to sustain themselves, and also possibly have a profession at it where they can actually get paid rather than having to pay to do it at the minute when they're racing against the men.
Yes, it's going to be great. We've got Lizzie Whitmore in there as well for British interest. Bea Naylor's been very much involved in the promotion of the whole thing. Spanish rider we've had before in Supersport 300, and she was in Jerez, wasn't she, putting some laps in on the R7. Talking of Yamahas, by the way, I hear there's going to be the new Yamaha R9 next year in World Supersport, as opposed to the all-conquering Yamaha R6, which has taken many, many titles in the past. So I can't remember a year, James. I've been now commentating on World Superbike since 2015, with Eurosport since 2017. You first stepped into the paddock whenever it was, late 90s. I can't remember many years where we've had so many talking points going into a new World Championship season.
Yeah, it is. That R9 is an interesting one as well. That's a triple, Greg. So,
yeah.
You're looking like, obviously like the Triumph, the 765 engine. The Yamaha R9 is that. It's, because the R6 got so expensive to tune and develop to keep up with the 955 twin of the Bulegger from last season. Manufacturers had to do something, and the rules had to change to make it much more affordable to go racing. So you didn't have to develop and tune these bikes to a standstill. The engine, you had 5 engines for the homologation for the season, in Supersport. But, the R9, you could probably get away with 2 or 3 because of you don't have to tune them as much, because the R9, I think it was 117 brake horsepower roughly, and the R6, after all of the kind of like tuning, was about 115. So it's already more powerful than the R6 was, and it can compete in a championship, obviously with different CCs, as long as you can get the torque curve with the ECU that Adorno that they can control it to try and keep it more competitive. It wasn't that competitive this year, was it? The twin Ducati seemed like it was a little bit of an advantage, or a massive advantage in some places. So fingers crossed, this R9 coming in, as well as the MV Agusta's new bike and stuff like that, the Triumph, it's going to get closer again this season.
Yeah, we'll have to wait for an official confirmation from Yamaha to see, but it looks like it's going to be based, this R9, on the MT-09, so we'll see what happens there. But yeah, there's so much going on at the moment. It is spectacular. Well, James, thanks for that. I'm really glad the wrist is heading in the right direction. And yeah, are you happy to come back next week? We'll discuss about the who the potential title contenders are in World Superbikes.
Absolutely, and we'll try and divulge all of this in a 15-minute qualifying, so we'll better hold your breath.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, James. Thanks very much again to James Toseland for that, and we'll be hearing more from him in our next podcast, which we're bringing forward not Thursday, but to Monday next week, Monday the 19th of February. Now, as mentioned there, I've been trying to get the latest on this situation regarding the tyres in Australia and the fact that World Supersport are going to be testing on Monday and World Superbike on Tuesday. Usually they split them across the 2 days. So what I've heard from somebody at the organisation, some tyre containers will get there a bit later than planned. Global maritime freight has been pretty spotty for the last few months. As I said before, we've been hearing a lot about that, haven't we, on the news? And I've managed to try and get some sort of word from Pirelli. And what they're saying at the moment is that they basically suggested that with this situation and some of the Superbike tyres arriving later than expected because of this late ship arrival, that put Supersport out first, give them the whole of Monday, and then Superbike the whole of the Tuesday. What I haven't been able to fathom out is whether they are sending different tyres. This is the bit that confuses me at the moment as we record this podcast. Usually all of the Phillip Island tyres are sent out in November of the year before, ahead of a race at the end of February, and stored in shipping containers. So the thing that confuses me right now, a bit perplexing, is why are they only sending out tyres now? So either this is a situation that's been ongoing now for the last few weeks / months, and they've known this is going to be tight, and it really has come down to the very last minute, or they've sent out another batch of tyres maybe, bearing in mind we do have this new track surface, which they say at Phillip Island might be up to 2 seconds a lap quicker. We know with the anti-clockwise nature that James has described in podcasts before and earlier on, that Phillip Island is particularly demanding on the tyres, especially with the temperatures there coming to the end of the Australian summer, which is superb for spectating, of course, but a real challenge for the tyres. So we'll keep you updated. We'll be back on Monday. If we've heard any more, we will let you know. But for now, that has been the Motorbike Racing Show. We will be back then with part 2 with James Toseland again of the World Superbike season preview. That's next Monday, the 19th of February. Have a great weekend. Where do you listen to your podcasts? At home or on the go? Subscribe now to Talking Away with Greg Haines on your favourite platform. You'd be doing me a favour if you did.